Good afternoon, everyone. As we're all project managers here, sticklers for time, so starting dead on 12. So my name is Emma Rogolski, and I'm a chartered project manager and a volunteer for APM's Scottish Network. On behalf of the Scottish Network at APM, thank you all for joining us virtually today. And a bit of context to this session. As an APM network, we actually held this session earlier in the year with Chris and Peter, and had such good feedback. We were really keen to broaden the reach. And amazing to see in the chat there that we're even broadening that to Malaysia. So welcome, everyone. And what better week to do this than a Mental Health Awareness Week, which is this week. So as project managers, I think we often experience dynamic and a fast-paced role. While there are aspects of these that can cause stressful situations, I think if we're being honest with ourselves, that variety and excitement is also what makes us love being project managers. However, there's always space to increase our awareness of mental health, look for the signs, and of course, as we are project managers, take some plans of action. Today, our webinar is titled Including Mental Health Support in Project Delivery, and this will provide you with some practical tools and techniques to support your own and your colleagues' mental health. This session is being recorded and will be made available on APM's YouTube shortly. Please share with your colleagues and your network and sit back and enjoy the webinar. I'm delighted to welcome Chris Drysdale and Peter Huggett to take you through today's webinar. Any questions and answers should be submitted in the chat function, and we will answer them at the end of the session. Over to you both.
Okay, great. Thanks, Emma. Good afternoon to all of you that are joining, and thank you. Just a quick, not really much more to say than what Emma has introduced. So we're going to talk today about including mental health support in project delivery. My name's Chris, and with me is my colleague Pete. Over to you, Pete.
Yeah, so we're 2 minutes in. You've already had a Menti meeting. You're going to have a second one, I'm afraid. So we're just going to spend 30 seconds on this slide to give you an opportunity to scan the QR code. And what we would like you to do is just answer the question that you're presented with. We'll come back and revisit some of the answers. We're going to be populating a word cloud effectively. So we'll just hang tight here whilst you answer the question, what are the signs of a decline in a person's mental well-being? So hopefully that QR code will pop up a little question for you. You can put in a couple of answers there, and we'll come back to that in a second. I'll just hang back for a few seconds, and then we'll crack on with the rest of the presentation. So quickly then, an agenda of what we're going to be talking about over the next hour or so. We'll give you a quick introduction to myself and Chris and what Silverstream do and the sort of aims of this section. We'll introduce you to the idea of mental health or mental well-being and the role of a mental health first aider in the workplace, and some tools that we were introduced to either through the mental health first aid training or some stuff that we have picked up along the way. We'll talk to you about Silverstream and our own mental health first aid strategy, which has existed for about 18 months now. And then we'll link that all together at the end with mental health first aid as a part of the broader project management landscape. Want to introduce yourself, Chris?
Yeah, so my name is Chris Drysdale, and I've worked as the project team lead in Silverstream for the last 18 months or so. And prior to that, I worked for 3 years in the net zero energy business of Atkins, the engineering consultancy, and before that, 8 years with Babcock International as firstly a process engineer, and then a project manager on liquefied gas carrier ships, which were executed in Korea. I underwent mental health first aider training in June of 2021, and since then I've been an active practitioner of such.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm Pete Huggett. I'm the head of quality, health, safety and the environment for Silverstream. I've worked there for about 18 months now. Prior to that, I worked at Rolls-Royce Aerospace. So I was there for 8 years with experience in operations, quality, manufacturing, engineering. In my role as head of QHSE, I develop and maintain our management system in line with the ISO standards, as well as supporting quality investigations with the operational and technical teams. Just a quick spiel on what we do at Silverstream then. So Silverstream have developed a patented air lubrication system, which fundamentally changes the interaction between water and a vessel. It shears air pumped to the ship's hull, creating a uniform carpet of muck bubbles, which coat the full flat bottom of a vessel, and as a result, friction resistance is decreased, dramatically reducing fuel consumption and associated emissions. Just to explain that a bit further, you can see here the bottom of a vessel. You've got our array of what we call air release units, and that shears that air and creates that carpet of bubbles across the bottom of the vessel, reducing said friction, reducing fuel consumption. And with this drive for net zero, our technology becomes a key enabler. We were the Financial Times' 4th fastest growing company in Europe. We currently have about 140 employees, looking to be up to about 180 by the end of 2024. We have a mix of ages, genders, sexualities, ethnicities, and sort of with that expansion, it becomes more and more important to consider the mental health or mental well-being of our colleagues.
Okay, thanks, Peter. So, just to clarify, the aims for this session today are to introduce tools and techniques that can be used to assess and improve mental well-being for both yourself and others, and then propose the benefits to project delivery by having a mental health support network. Now, please note that this session is not a substitute for formal mental health first aider training, which requires 2 full days, which when Peter and I went through a refresher earlier last year, were split into 4 half days. And further to that, I wish to advise a health warning to all of you. It is difficult to predict what may trigger emotional reactions in any person. So therefore, if you do feel uncomfortable, please do not hesitate to step away from this webinar at any point if the content does set off a trigger in you.
So we'll introduce mental health quickly before moving on to the role of the mental health first aider. So I guess the key point here is that mental health impacts everyone. Mental health problems are common, but help is obviously available. Mental health is important at every stage of your life, from childhood through adolescence and throughout adulthood as well. It includes our emotional, psychological and social well-being. It affects how we think, feel and act. It also helps us determine how we handle stress, relate to others and make choices. Over the course of your life, if you're experiencing mental health problems, your thinking or your mood and your behaviour could be affected. And many factors can also contribute to your mental health, including biological factors like genes or brain chemistry, life experiences such as trauma or abuse. You might have a history of mental health problems within your family, and of course exercise and diet, which can negatively but also positively impact your mental health or mental well-being. People with mental health problems can get better, and many obviously recover completely. Another factor we've included at the bottom here is this social interaction. And as we know, that's what we all went through COVID, which also had a massive impact on our mental well-being and also our approach to mental health. So I actually became a mental health first aider in 2019, just before the pandemic, and I've seen that there's been a big change in how we approach mental health first aid in the workplace. Obviously with the change in working patterns, so as you can see, I'm working from home now. I spend most of my time at home, going down to the office in London maybe once or twice a week. But that certainly changed my approach in my working pattern to make sure I'm looking after my mental well-being. Just a few sort of statistics here that sort of highlight that. Around a third of adults and young people said that their mental health has got much worse since March 2020. 88% of young people said loneliness made their mental health worse during the pandemic, and death by suicide is the 11th leading cause of death in the UK and is the biggest killer for men under 45.
Yeah, following on from what Pete has just advised, I think the statistics that are shown in this slide do speak for themselves, with nearly 1 million workers suffering from work-related stress, depression or anxiety in 2021-2022. And nearly 400,000 of those were new cases, and that led to 17 million working days lost in that period of time. Now, I appreciate that COVID, of course, may have been a disruptor here, but I think we would all accept that these numbers are very large, and anything we can do to improve them is most certainly worthwhile.
So what can mental health first aid do in the workplace? So as mental health first aiders, we identify warning signs and reach out to our colleagues We provide support and develop action plans. We signpost good behaviours or habits that you can sort of develop to maintain or improve your mental health, as well as habits that can obviously negatively impact your mental health. We reduce the stigma by promoting conversation and engagement on mental health throughout the workplace and society. And we increase general morale and well-being, ensure the workforce feels like the company genuinely cares about them and their mental well-being. A key point here is that mental health first aiders are considered to be sort of triage only. We're not mental health professionals or therapists. We simply recognise certain behaviours, promote positive well-being, and signpost individuals as and when they need that support. One of the tools that you're introduced to, or the main tool you're introduced to throughout the mental health first aid training, is this ALGE. So approach, listen, give encouragement, and give professional support. So when it comes to the sort of approach or assess stage, that could be yourself identifying a change of behaviour in one of your colleagues or one of your friends or family, or it could be them coming to you. And the key thing about this approach or assess stage is quickly identifying whether that person is considered to be in crisis. Do they need immediate professional support? Are they a danger to themselves or a danger to somebody else? Next key point is to listen non-judgmentally. So get them to explain to you how it is they're feeling and talk to you about maybe some changes that they've suffered in their work or their personal life that may contribute towards that change. Once you better understand how they're feeling or what may have contributed, you can then have, I guess, more information to better direct them. So we give them support and give them information. There's heaps of resources out there that will signpost you to in the end, but depending on how that person is suffering, there are different resources to sort of tackle that. Beyond that, it's about encouraging professional help and encouraging additional support. And obviously, as part of that encouraging additional support, it's your role to follow up with that individual and ensure that they are improving, ensure that they are looking after themselves, and also ensure that you are doing what you can as a business to support that individual and make changes where we can accommodate it. So sticking with the assess stage, we've got the Mentimeter here. Now I will just check that this is refreshing. Hopefully you had a chance to populate this. I can actually see in the background there are a lot of new words on here, so hopefully this does work out. There we are. Plenty more to go at. But Chris, I know it's worth picking up on a couple here that sort of resonate with you. I did see anxiety in there somewhere. I can see withdrawal, change of behaviour, absence from work, exhaustion, irritable, lack of appetite. I mean, all great stuff, all relevant, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, some great stuff in here.
I guess also one thing that we'll come on to in a bit more detail in the subsequent slides is that you can pick out some signs that are more internal and some signs that are external. Some signs here, for example, absence from work. You may have noticed that one of your colleagues is absent from work, so that's potentially a sign that they're suffering a bit. But anxiety, for example, is something that's very internal, so it's something that you wouldn't necessarily be able to spot as easily in your colleague. But the fact that they are absent from work may be a sign that they are suffering from one of those sort of internal signs. Yeah, go on. It's a great work, Cloud. Appreciate all your interaction.
Yeah, thank you. It's good. So, thanks for that, Pete. Now, what we have on the slide here is a tool that I've used in the past to assess mental well-being and stress levels. In this spectrum, I find that going through this, and if I asked you to quickly circle, and by quickly I mean without over-analysing and looking right into it, that the statements that are applicable to how you or the colleague or a contact feel can be a simple, ready reckoner, and that can be used to inform a mental health action plan. And then revisiting this after a period of time to gauge if that mental health action plan has improved the situation. Now, as an example, consider the statements in the amber struggling column. We have avoiding interaction, self-medicating, persistent anxiety. you can assess mental well-being of yourself or others really quickly there. And then further, if I look across it quite laterally, the sleep statements are useful and easy to understand for every single one of us. In the green column, we have normal sleep patterns. Of course, you're not going to consider you have a mental health well-being situation there. But we look at trouble sleeping or eating in the yellow surviving column, moving towards a degradation. And then in the struggling column, we have restless, disturbed sleep. And then in the red in crisis column, we have unable to fall or stay asleep. I think using this tool I find it has been useful for even my own mental health and well-being, for quickly doing a quick ready reckoner, but at the same time I've used it in multiple interactions with colleagues and others when supporting their mental health to assess their situation at that point in time when we have the initial conversation, but then use it to gauge the differences the next time I speak with that person.
And just going back to that statement I made before about sort of external and internal feelings. So if I look down the surviving column here, you've got here sort of inconsistent performance, more easily overwhelmed or irritated. These are kind of external signs that you might be picking up in a colleague. You can't then assume as part of this approach and assess stage that they are simply in this surviving column. It might actually be that they are in crisis and actually there's something more underlying that needs to be addressed here. So it's about just making sure we're not making assumptions, and we're talking to that individual to get to the root of how it is they're feeling or how it is that they're behaving. And just sticking with that then. So if someone was kind of in that crisis mode, we should be asking these kind of questions. Does the individual need immediate professional support? Are they presenting a danger to themselves or anyone else? And can you remove them from a difficult situation or environment? So one of these could be a panic attack, for example. And as someone who has suffered from a panic attack some years ago, I kind of know what works in this kind of scenario. So if I had an individual that was maybe having a panic attack, one of the tools that I use is this sort of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 concept. So ask that individual, once you've taken them away from a certain scenario, ask them to acknowledge 5 things around them that they can see, 4 that they can touch, 3 that you can hear, 2 that you can smell, and then one that you can taste. And I know for a fact that this is one of the tools that can take you out of that sort of mode of panic and get you thinking sort of more consistently about your feelings and get to the root of it.
Okay, thanks, Pete. I'd like to follow on that and spend a moment talking about coping strategies. And as stated on the slide, what works for you may not work for others. So, for example, my coping strategies are running, listening to music and cooking, amongst others. But I appreciate that these may very well not work for other people. And considering these, so exercise, what suits you? Now, running, I've stated, works for me. A weight session in the gym may work for you, but that would stress me out. That doesn't work for me. Eating is something else to consider. It's easy to say eat well, and that said, I'm sure there are times when, picking out on your favourite unhealthy foods will make you happy. So at what point in time does that become a healthy or an unhealthy coping strategy, and how does that suit you? How about meditation or even therapy? Now, it's well documented that speaking through a situation with an empathetic listener can work wonders for your mental well-being. And I feel that it should be noted that talking about your situation is often the hardest step. Further, how many of you are aware of your personality type? And by that I mean, are you an introvert or an extrovert? Extroverted people often need social company to recharge when they feel drained. Conversely, introverts are the opposite, and they need and look for time alone to recharge. And that leads me to, how about drinking? I expect we all acknowledge that drinking alcohol can be good to de-stress. However, 1 or 2 glasses of wine after a tough day can easily turn into a regular coping strategy. So what I'd like to sort of finally summarise on that is that we all need to be aware when a coping strategy becomes potentially unhealthy habit. And in that case, seeking professional support may be required. But again, what I'm really trying to say here is consider what coping strategies may work for you, may not work for you, and with others and colleagues and contacts that you're having mental health first aid conversations with, understand what may work for that person as a coping strategy or a coping method to improve their mental well-being. Moving on, this is something I've used in the past, and I'd like to suggest that any of you can use to develop even an action plan. So a friend of mine, who is also a fellow mental health first aider, advised me many years ago of this acronym for quickly and easily developing a mental health action plan. Now, I've used this several times to support colleagues who are struggling with their mental well-being at work. And I have one example that rings, quite strongly in my mind, where I had a colleague who was moved onto a key project and given some serious stretch targets. Now, both the client and the team colleagues were very challenging of each other, cultivating in what I'll call an intense environment. Now, this colleague quickly became very stressed and led to panic attacks, both at work, on the way to work, and even at home on a Sunday evening. That was the level of anxiety they had. Now, this colleague refused to walk away from the opportunity. They seen that as career suicide. So we used the West framework to put an action plan in place and create boundaries. We looked at rigidity of start and finish times in the office, taking lunch break away from the desk and the colleagues, and even if there was work remaining to be done, leave the office at a set time, go home, get back to your exercise routine, which is fell away, back to cooking. Now, time constraints had impacted this also. And then, if need be, log back on after you've had some time to have a life, because this colleague found that staying in the office beyond sort of 7 p.m. was eliminating their exercise regime, their cooking, and other things that they do in their own domestic life. I think we all know that taking a break works wonders for focus. You can't just continue to push on. Setting a shutdown time in the evening as well for getting sleep, putting your digital devices, your smartphones down. And finally, I wanted that person to utilise myself as a mental health first aider, but also other mental health first aiders within that business to talk about the situation without having fear of career implications, etc. Now, this example was not a quick fix. The colleague did struggle to set those boundaries, but bit by bit they did by going one by one. And their comfort at work with the situation and general well-being did increase. Now, personally, I found this a challenging episode, and I spoke with more experienced mental health first aiders across that wider organisation to get support and guidance on should I go to that person's line manager, should I be going to my line manager to discuss it? I was using the wider forum and support network because I can't advise any of you what is right and wrong in a situation, but I really found that having that network of other mental health first aiders was invaluable. So in summary, I think we have here West, walking, which is exercise, eating, quite clear, sleeping, talked about that, and then again talking, which is difficult. I think this is a tool that any of you can use to put an action plan together to support yourself or others, colleagues.
Yeah, it's a really useful tool. I know we've spoken before quite a lot, and I think the most important thing for me personally is setting up those boundaries. And we mentioned COVID before and the impact that it's had on our working patterns. And I know when we originally went down into COVID and we worked from home, we weren't set up for it. And I found myself getting up, having a quick bite to eat, and then logging on and starting to work. I've actually got myself into a routine now of when I'm working from home, getting out of the house, and for me that was go to the gym for an hour, come back home, and sort of have that reset button. It was my commute, if you like, and it helped me set those boundaries so I knew when work started and when work finished, and it certainly helped me separate the two. I'll just quickly flash this up, and we'll be able to send this out afterwards. So these are just some of the tools that we use as mental health first aiders, and this is all part of the sort of encourage professional help and additional support. Depending on what either you or your colleague or your loved one is feeling, there are different resources available to you. So Hub of Hope, for example, will signpost you to local resources, local support, local therapy. You've got NHS talking therapies. Now, obviously, if through that assess stage, that individual is maybe in a state of crisis, then you might signpost to things like Shout Samaritans, or, of course, the emergency services. So now that we've introduced sort of mental health first aid, quickly show you what we've done within Silverstream Technologies. So myself and Chris got together, it was probably just over 18 months ago now, and decided that we had to put together a mental health first aid strategy for Silverstream. So on the left-hand side here, you can see that we've got all of our mental health first aiders. The team has actually expanded since this point. As mentioned before, a mix of age, ethnicity, gender, sexuality. It's all about making sure that you've got individuals representing the mental health first aid team who everyone in the company feel comfortable with going to approach. So somebody working for Chris, for example, may not feel comfortable going and talking to Chris about their mental health, then feel more comfortable talking to Lucy, for example. So since we created this team, we completed our formal training with Mental Health First Aid England. We've got senior leadership sponsorship, which is clearly important to make sure all of the employees sort of understand the importance of mental health first aid. We launched a mental health tracker, and I'll show you some of this in a second. We have weekly communications on health and safety. So all of the company get together on a Monday morning, and as part of the weekly comms, we have a health and safety moment, and that can include a mental health as well. We have regular catch-ups for the mental health first aid team. So Lucy is kindly sort of taking the reins at the moment. So every quarter we get together, we talk through what we've noticed in the business, maybe things that the business needs to improve on when it comes to mental health, or look at events in the future that we think we should be getting involved with. I'll talk through the Mental Health Awareness Week for 2023 in a second and what we did for that. But this year we're promoting everyone to get out and get walking, and it's actually quite drizzly here, but certainly in the last few days it's been glorious weather. So all of May we're looking for everyone to get outside and get some exercise, make sure they spend some time looking after themselves. And we've got a Silverstream sort of social page where we encourage people to share what they're doing and share some photos. A lot of dog pictures in the last couple of months. So this is just some of the stuff that we put in place to support that. I said before about having a mental health tracker. So we obviously anonymously log some of the conversations that we have. Now the purpose of this is to pick up on maybe some trends within the business, if there is a particular team that's feeling under stress, or if there is maybe some change within the business which is causing some stress. Recording it allows us to maybe communicate up to our senior leadership team some changes or suggestions that we need to put in place to make sure we're supporting our teams. It also ensures that we can communicate to the rest of the mental health first aid team how we handled that particular interaction. Middle left, you've got here a safety moment that we've shared during one of those Monday morning calls that I mentioned before. So looking after your mental health when working from home. On the right hand side, we have a dedicated SharePoint page. So we signpost regularly our employees to this page if they need support. Sometimes a colleague might not feel comfortable talking with anyone within the business. So we make sure we signpost on SharePoint where they can find that support outside of the company. And finally, that middle slide there, we tie this all into some of our formal processes. So we recognise mental health first aiders in our organisation structure. We've got our safety cards, so that's a pack of cards that everyone carries around with them if they're travelling with the company. And you've got a dedicated slide there, which gives them information even when they're not at their desk on where they can find that additional support. This is just a quick overview of what we did in 2023 for Mental Health Awareness Week. So we had sort of an agenda of various events across the week. We had our bingo card where people can check off certain activities that are encouraged to partake in to improve their mental health. We had a Mental Health Awareness Week round table where we got a few people, including a senior leader, to talk about mental health and how we look after our own mental health. We sort of had a lot of walk and talk, so got people out of the office, certainly if the weather was nice, to get people talking about anything other than work, essentially. And then obviously Wear It Green, that's the theme of the Mental Health Awareness Week last year. So everyone turning up to the office on one particular day wearing green. And I mentioned before that the Silverstream social chat, which we still have today, we launched that last year in conjunction with Mental Health Awareness Week. and to get people sharing some of the things that they are doing to look after their mental health. And it was a great success.
Okay, thanks, Pete. This slide here is one that I developed during COVID to establish good behaviours during meetings, which were primarily remote, I'm sure you appreciate. I will explain the benefits and then the relevance to this webinar. Now, going through the points that are noted on the slide, number one, no interruptions. I think that speaks for itself. There's very little that's worse in a meeting than being cut down before you're finished saying your point. Now, two, leadership. Try and have one person, which is quite often a project manager, leading the meeting by keeping to agenda, timekeeping, taking notes or delegating, and then try to referee the no interruptions point as advised before. Number three, agenda. I personally believe that all meetings, even catch-ups, should have an agenda, and that allows participants to prepare in advance, again with consideration of introverted personalities, as we discussed earlier. Number four, inclusion. Every attendee should be asked for their opinion. I feel it's inefficient to have hours wasted with people in meetings saying nothing unless they're there on a clear listening brief. And at the end of the meeting, the leader shall summarise the main points and actions. And lastly, visibility. Now again, this was more of a COVID remote working point. I think we all appreciate that having video cameras on does force people to be present and participate, not just attend meetings. Now in summary, what this initiative is psychological safety by stealth. And the real indirect benefit is to drive and improve inclusion. And I think Pete and I are now going to talk about psychological safety a bit further.
So I'll introduce the idea of psychological safety in a second. On the left-hand side, I've just included here our Silverstream safety principles. This is something that we try and communicate as regularly as possible. And it's something that we should all be sort of standing behind, no matter what level we're at in the business. I guess one thing to think about in your own organisation is, what is the safety culture like in your company? And does your strategy include psychological safety? So psychological safety is a shared belief within a group that no one will be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas or questions, concerns or mistakes. At work, psychological safety is essential for employee wellbeing, engagement and performance. And there are 4 stages, as can be seen by this slide. We've got inclusion, learner, contributor and challenger. And each stage of psychological safety highlights behaviours that a team can adopt to create an inclusive, a supportive and a safe working environment. And technically there is, I guess, a 5th before inclusion, which is exclusion. But once you introduce a new team member to the group, they naturally adopt the role of simply being included. Now, as a learner, you start to engage in the discovery process, ask questions, and maybe even be confident enough to make mistakes. A contributor is a fully fledged member taking active part in discussion. And when you're a challenger, it doesn't simply refer to one's ability to challenge others in discussion, but will challenge the role or challenge the direction of the team. It can develop confrontation, but in a healthy way. And if you're truly going to innovate as a group, then the challenge is really positive. An important reflection I had on this is that challenging individuals can look different to different people. So Chris touched upon whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. So you get a lot of individuals who are quite happy being almost socially isolated when it comes to their work, certainly if into things like computer programming. And so this idea of having individuals sat around a round table, almost debating or arguing, is just sort of one view of what it means to be a challenger. Everyone has their different ways of sort of fulfilling these roles. It's all about creating an environment that allows your team to gain confidence and feel comfortable in moving up these levels.
Thanks, Pete. Now, on the slide in front of you now, you will see Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Now, regardless of whether you've seen this before, I'd like you to consider what your current level is when you look at your own work situation right now. So I'm going to go through the level from bottom to top to try and explain how this links in. Now, if you look at the bottom, we have physiological needs, stroke, safety. Now, I expect that for each of us, your basic needs are cared for at work, with a warm, dry office, with appropriate toilets, etc. However, have any of you ever been to a work site where that's not the case? Ask yourself, how did you feel at that point? And I'm sure the answer will be, not comfortable. And then we move up to belonging. I'd like you to think back to the first few days of your current job, and were you warmly included and involved from minute one? Or were you parked in the corner with an induction pack, watching everything go on around, all around you? And I expect we've all had times where you felt like a fish out of water and you may have made a massive mistake. You have no established relationships and you feel like you don't belong. So moving up into the blue part, we have esteem. So conversely, think of a time when you've achieved something significant at work, and how did that make you feel? I'm sure a sense of purpose, you felt engaged and you felt wanted. And then moving up to the top of the pyramid, we have self-actualization. A situation where you feel enabled to create, you feel compelled to take the initiative and make things happen. Now, for most of us, that the point at the top of the pyramid where you feel in the self-actualization situation, that, for me anyway, that's been occasional and rare. But I'd like to hope that each of you have been there at least once, and you can now look back and contrast that at the times when you were at the foot of that pyramid where you didn't feel safe, you didn't feel comfortable. So I'd now like to play a short video to give us something to think about. Okay, now in the event that any of you had any sort of IT trouble and weren't hearing or seeing that video, I'd like to strongly suggest you find yourself on YouTube or other file sharing servers and look for Matthew Said. And what I would like to talk about now is that the narrator of the book that I show on the screen is it's a fantastic book named Rebel Ideas. And in this book, Matthew Said opened my mind to a concept named cognitive diversity. One example from that book that I find quite powerful is on team building, quite simple. If you want to win a sprint relay race, you find the 4 fastest runners, regardless of their diversity. However, as I'm sure we all face on a daily basis, if you have a complex problem, then you're reducing your options by not compiling a cognitively diverse team with people who have varied frames of reference. And this is often people who are different from each other. Now, I personally am not experienced enough to talk in depth about equality. And to be frank, as a middle-aged white Scottish male who studied engineering, I feel privileged to have had very little prejudice in my working life. However, an ex-colleague who is much more informed on ED&I than I am advised me that the key to succeeding at ED&I is to focus on inclusion. Now, Pete and I have talked over the last 10-15 minutes about psychological safety. And for me, psychological safety is inclusion, and it provides a platform for people to feel included, feel like they belong, and feel like they can be creative, especially in a work situation. Going back to the Maslow's hierarchy of needs from the previous slide. So conversely, how many of you have seen a diverse individual join a company that you've worked with, that person sat quietly in team meetings, they've not got involved in socials or in meetings, that offer very little, and then they've resigned after a number of months? In the post-COVID hybrid working landscape, I've seen this a few times. And looking back, I feel that was really due to a lack of focus on inclusion. And just to finalise, you can hire all the diverse people you wish and improve conditions to reach equality, but if you don't include people, that's all a massive waste of time and effort. And again, I'd just like to highlight, have a look on YouTube for Matthew Said. If you can, on audiobook or the actual book itself, Rebel Ideas by Matthew Said really helped me understand ED&I much better, cognitive diversity. The book itself is not, whilst this might sound like a heavy topic, the examples and the stories within it are quite light. It's an enjoyable book. Strongly suggest you look for it if you're interested. Okay, now final stretch of Pete and I talking at you, and or me especially. I'd like to bring this together and talk about the benefits to project managers and project delivery. So as members of APM, I expect that most of you here are either PMs or you work with project managers. I feel there's a lot of value to what Pete and I have discussed today, but I wish to zero in on some real benefits when considering 3 competencies in the APM Chartered Project Professional Guidelines for CHPP. Now, looking across team management, conflict resolution and leadership, I see a consistent thread through all this of trust, collaboration, communication, support and respect, and other key words as per the slides that I'm showing in front of you. And as project managers, I'm sure that each of us would like our team meetings, our progress reviews, our lessons learned, etc., to all be a much more psychologically safe space. And you look at the slide that's shown there, the green box highlights resolving conflict to respect the views, opinions and concerns of all parties, supporting others to resolve conflict. And if we look at the leadership box, the green part again, encouraging others to adopt behaviours which build trust, confidence and collaboration within or between teams. Again, I feel like I'm reading these out, but I think the words are key. Addressing difficulties and challenges, facilitating open discussions. And then lastly, we look at the third one I'm drawing out on team management. Building the relationship of trust and support, considering possible complexities of collaboration, virtual working, time zones, cultures, again, opportunities for coaching, mentoring. It's again all about creating that environment, learning and trust, promoting development. I think the consistent thread across the three of them. So, final slide. So following on from this, I believe a mental health first aid support group within your workplace, alongside behaviours which create and improve psychological safety within your workplace, can lead to a more inclusive culture and therefore increase the general well-being of you and your colleagues. As I said moments ago, who as a PM could dispute that environment would not be much more conducive to better results, whilst, much more importantly, potentially saving a colleague from a safety incident or a crisis situation due to their mental health concerns. And finally, I'd like to highlight section 3.2.6 of the APM Body of Knowledge, Diversity and Inclusion. And that has the following quote: "The project professional has the opportunity to embrace the diversity and capabilities of their team. A positive working environment happens when people feel they can be themselves at work, where ideas and respectful challenge are encouraged and differences are understood and welcomed." So with that, I'd like to finish. Pete, anything more from yourself before we hand back to Emma?
That's everything from me. Nicely tied up. Thank you.
Thanks to all for your time to attend. And if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Emma.
Fantastic, thank you both. I believe we just had one more slide that we popped in from an APM perspective available, hopefully, if you can tab on. Okay, perfect, thank you. So this was just to make everyone aware on the call that there is in fact a wealth of information available via APM. So if you just go on the APM website and use the search function and type in mental health toolkit, it's a page similar to this will pop up. But to just kind of highlight some specific pieces that I think are really helpful. There's guidance, as you can see, there's thought leadership and links to a wide range. And there's a really good piece of APM funded research about wellbeing of project managers and all sorts of contacts that you would need for further support. So very worthwhile having a look at. So now we'll jump into Q&A. Just to give you some immediate positive feedback, we've had some great comments in the chat around how well this has gone. So one from Alice saying no questions from me, but a fantastic session and finding the content really valuable. Michelle seconds that, and I'll start you off easily with a question from her around can you advise who provided your mental health first aid training?
Yeah, so we went straight through Mental Health First Aid England, and so if you go to the website for Mental Health First Aid England, that the training itself is sort of outsourced to third parties, so you'll be able to find a trainer in your area and you contact them directly, and then they'll be able to give you various options depending on your own circumstances. So at Silverstream, we're split between the UK and Shanghai. I explained sort of the importance of making sure we've got coverage of mental health first aid support in both sites. So we held it was a hybrid, I guess. So we had Jessica come in from Mental Health First Aid England, and she performed the training on site in the UK, but it was broadcast over Teams at the same time so that we included Shanghai. But depending on your own circumstances, you can do it all online, or you can do it all in person if you've got the space at your company.
That's great, super helpful. A question from Sharon is around they are starting their own project PM processes in their area, and looking to write up guidelines, and has a question around what you would add in the kind of mental health and wellbeing sections.
That's a good question. Something I was thinking about as we were going through this, when Pete was talking about what we've done within Silverstream, what we've not done is purely trained up people to be mental health first aiders, but we also have processes and procedures at the back of that from a wider HSE perspective. Now, Peter can probably talk about this more, but to answer the question given, I think you should make sure that the business or your business does have the wider well-being background and consideration with employee assistance programs and not purely mental health first aiders. From a project management perspective, I think some of what I tried to talk around at the end with regard making sure that there's collaboration both internally with other functions in your business, but also externally. I think signaling to clients and OEMs, etc., that you have mental health first aiders, that you take mental well-being of yourself, your colleagues, and others, that you respect that. I think that signals, it supports breaking the stigma, but can say also to your clients and internal stakeholders that you care and you believe that this is how people should behave, that we will work together, again, psychological safety. I hope that partially answers the question. Pete, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, it was. So it all sort of kicked off for us with a session with our senior leadership team who were keen to introduce this, and so it was then up to us to sort of put a plan in place to get it going. The mental health first aid England element of it was important to make sure we're kind of doing everything properly, if that makes sense, because we then hold a responsibility. But when I spoke about forming that team of mental health first aid support, it's not just that group of mental health first aiders, it is a group of champions as well who are keen to get involved. And I mentioned as well having that sort of safety culture element of it. The biggest part of our role as mental health first aiders or champions is to make sure we're reminding the business who we are, what we do, give them support, and continue with those sort of communications, and hopefully then develop that sort of psychologically safe space, as it were. It's all about making sure that you've got regular communications. For me, it's most important.
Fantastic. Another one in the chat for you is around a resource called Relate, and have you considered using that to support your sources, specifically around the relationship problems can be a major cause of stress, and Relate work with individuals and couples to support on that. It's something I've not heard of.
No, the quick answer is no, me neither, but I've written it down straight away. So yeah, go on. I flashed up that slide before with all the stuff that we tend to use. That's not exhaustive, so I'll make sure that is added to the list. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Great. That does run through what we've got. I had a question, if you don't mind, while we wait for anyone else on the webinar to pop in any more questions they have in the chat. So we're currently in the process on my project of setting up wellbeing ambassadors for our programme, and the structure of that I was keen to get your guidance on. So we're keen to have wellbeing ambassadors identified, but would you say it's better to have those wellbeing ambassadors related and available to the work stream they're in, or sort of mix it up and make it a bit more independent?
For me, it's independence. Well, I think it largely depends on the individual, but I think for me, it's having someone independent. We spoke about having a team set up that is sort of diverse in many ways, but including sort of organisationally. So making sure that every individual feels comfortable in seeking that support, regardless of where they are in the organisation. So I think it's that independence.
I'm getting nods from Chris. I think he's in agreement with you.
I have very little to add there. Similar to what Pete mentioned, I think when we were discussing how we set up at Silverstream, that I head up a fairly large team, but having mental health first aiders and champions across our business, functionally and also locationally, in different, geographically, much better way of saying it, in different locations in our business, means that if someone within the team that I head up does not feel comfortable talking about their work-life balance, if they feel that could be a difficult conversation and potentially career limiting, I'd like to think that I'd be bigger than that, but they can speak to Pete or others within our business, or again, we could suggest others that we know through, our non-Silverstream forums. So I think having that distance and independence was the word that yourself and Pete used. I think that's it's needed rather than it just being me and me only.
No, that's super helpful. I'll definitely look to embed that and take that back to my organisation. Great. We've not had any more questions pop in the chat, so I'll probably just look to close at this point unless Peter, Chris, you have anything else you want to add?
No, it's been really helpful. Thank you. It's been enjoyable.
That's been great, thanks. And I believe, Emma, we will send the slides out later, so the tools and techniques we've talked about, everyone that's participated can have a look at that. And thank you everyone for your time. Thank you, Pete, for your support, and Emma for hosting.
Great. And just to add on to that, yes, everything will be available afterwards, and this is also getting recorded and will be available on YouTube afterwards. So appreciate this is a session over lunch, so the recording will make it available to anyone in your network, so please share that information. And I, of course, have a few thank yous to run through. So on behalf of the APM Scotland Network, thank you for everyone who joined us today. Thank you for APM for obviously making the time for this and supporting it and making it a free webinar for all. I believe these sessions increase the reach but also have a ripple effect, and it's a valuable conversation to have on mental health as part of the PM community. And hopefully, as it's recorded, it'll mean I do not have to twist Peter and Chris's arm again to do this first time. Although it gets better every time, and I don't promise that. So in closing, I hope that everyone took something away from today's session, and big thanks to Chris and Peter for all of their time sharing their experience and their expertise on this today. Thanks, everyone.
Great, thanks, Emma.
Thanks.
See ya.